In our early 20s, my buddy Alex and I used to go camping a lot, exploring the wilds of Michigan. This particular trip took place in the remote depths of Blackwood Forest when I was 23 and Alex was 24. It was my first time camping there, but Alex had been before. We planned our trips for weekdays to dodge crowds. Alex, an experienced camper, always took the lead on these outings. We parked near a small picnic area and hiked about 20 minutes into the forest until we found a clearing big enough for 2 tents, a portable stove, and a campfire. Setting up camp was routine. Alex had his tent pitched in minutes, while I wrestled with mine for what felt like forever. We gathered firewood and got a fire going as the sun dipped below the horizon. Dinner was burgers and sausages that Alex grilled to perfection. He always treated these trips like culinary adventures, and it was a highlight of the experience. As night fell, we cracked open a couple of beers, played some classic rock on the speaker, and reminisced about the past. There's a certain magic to those moments, just the crackling fire, good food, and the company of a close friend under the stars. Later, we broke out a deck of cards and started playing. That's when we heard it faint humming and the crunch of footsteps beyond the firelight. We paused, listening intently. Alex motioned for me to grab the flashlight, but by the time I found it, the sounds had stopped. Probably nothing, Alex said, though he looked uneasy. We tried to shake it off, but just as we started another game, a large stick landed in the middle of our campsite. It hadn't fallen from a tree, it was thrown. Alex shouted into the darkness, warning whoever was out there to back off. In response, we heard retreating footsteps. "Let's pack up and move," I whispered. "No way," Alex replied. "Not in the dark." We agreed to stay alert and kept our bear spray within arm's reach. As the night wore on, occasional snaps of branches and distant noises kept our nerves on edge. Eventually, Alex took the first watch while I tried to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up abruptly. Disoriented, I rubbed my eyes and glanced toward the tent's entrance. A head was peering inside, shadowed and unrecognizable in the dim light. "Alex," I mumbled groggily, thinking he was waking me from my shift. The figure didn't respond. Instead, the tent zipper suddenly closed and the head disappeared. I froze for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Then, a chilling realization hit me. Alex wouldn't just zip the tent back up like that. Heart pounding, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The campfire had died, and the clearing was eerily quiet. Alex's tent was zipped shut. I rushed over, unzipped it, and found him fast asleep. Shaking him awake, I whispered, "Someone's here." It took him a moment to wake up fully, but when he did, he grabbed the bear spray and came outside. He admitted he must have dozed off on watch. We decided to share his tent for the rest of the night, but I had to grab my sleeping bag first. As I reached my tent, the humming returned, soft, melodic, and deeply unsettling. Alex heard it too and whispered for me to hurry. We huddled in his tent, clutching the bear spray and barely speaking as the night crawled by. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. Finally, as dawn broke, we packed up and hiked back to the car without looking back. Neither of us wanted to camp anymore after that. The idea of someone stalking us in the wilderness, a place we'd always found peace, was too much to shake. It's been years since that night, and I still can't forget the face watching me through the tent flap or the haunting melody in the dark. Growing up, my mom always told me, "Don't fear the dead, fear the living. They're the ones who can hurt you." Those words stayed with me, especially after her tragic passing when I was 19. A year later, I inherited her small cabin in the remote woods of northern Vermont. The cabin sat near the base of Black Hollow Ridge, surrounded by endless pine trees. It was remote and peaceful, but my dad couldn't bear to keep it after her death, so it was listed for sale. However, the paperwork wasn't finalized yet, and the cabin was sitting vacant. Needing a break from my job and the relentless noise of city life, I decided to spend a week there with my dog, Echo, before it changed hands. The first 2 days were uneventful. I played with Echo in the snow, read books by the fire, and indulged in too much coffee and whiskey. The cabin was small but cozy, with 2 floors, a living area and kitchen downstairs, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. I stayed in the master bedroom, leaving the doors to the other rooms closed. By the 3rd day, a heavy snowfall kept me indoors. Echo and I played a lazy game of fetch in the yard before retreating inside. That's when things started to feel off. In the late afternoon, while Echo chased snowflakes in the yard, I noticed footprints circling the cabin. They were large, human-like, and looked fresh, despite the constant snowfall. The tracks led from the tree line to the side of the house and then disappeared back into the forest. I told myself it was probably just a curious hiker or someone passing through, but something about them unsettled me. That night, Echo's behavior changed. As I lay in bed scrolling on my phone, his ears perked up and he darted downstairs. I called after him, but he didn't respond. I could hear him pacing in the living room, his nails clicking on the hardwood floor. After a few minutes, he returned upstairs, whining softly and nudging my arm. He wanted to go outside. Reluctantly, I put on my boots and jacket and took him out to the driveway. But instead of doing his business, Echo tugged hard on his leash, pulling toward the dense trees at the edge of the property. He sniffed the ground furiously and kept glancing up at the roof of the cabin. I didn't see anything unusual, but Echo's behavior made my skin crawl. I pulled him back inside, locked the door, and tried to shake off the unease. About an hour later, as I started to doze off, I heard slow, deliberate steps on the roof. They weren't random like falling branches or animals scurrying. These sounded human. The spacing between each step suggested someone or something was walking, stride by stride. Echo ran to the balcony door, growling low in his throat. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. Snow covered the roof, undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then, I saw it. In a tree about 20 feet from the cabin, something was perched on a thick branch. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became. It was a figure gaunt and impossibly tall, crouched with long, spindly arms gripping the branch above its head. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its face was featureless except for a gaping, lipless mouth. I froze. "Bay!" Echo growled louder, pacing behind me. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared. Something in me screamed not to shine my flashlight on it, not to acknowledge it any more than I already had. Slowly, I backed into the cabin, pulling Echo with me. Once inside, I locked the door, shut the curtains, and sat on the bed, shaking. Echo refused to leave my side. But the nightmare wasn't over. Later that night, I heard tapping at the balcony door. Soft, rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers on the glass. Echo growled but wouldn't approach the door. The tapping continued for nearly an hour, unrelenting. A voice in my head, calm and steady, my mom's voice, told me not to open the door. Stay put. Don't let it in. I don't know how, but I fell asleep eventually. When I woke up, sunlight streamed through the windows. The tapping was gone, and the forest was silent. I packed up within the hour and left without looking back. The cabin sold a month later, and I never returned. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory of that figure in the tree, its unblinking gaze boring into me. My mom was right, sometimes the living are scarier than ghosts. But out there in the woods, I'm not so sure what I saw was ever alive. I had been seeing this woman, Leah, for a few weeks. We met on a dating app, clicked instantly, and had been on 2 dates. She was charming, a little older than me, and carried herself with a quiet confidence. By the time she invited me to a reunion party, I felt comfortable enough to say yes, even though we were still getting to know each other. The party was for Leah's former classmates from a private academy she attended in her teens. She told me the event was being hosted at a friend's estate on the outskirts of a small town. I didn't think much of it after all. Leah seemed genuine, and I felt it would be rude to turn her down after she'd spent time with my friends on our last date. When we arrived at the house, I was immediately struck by its size and grandeur. A long, winding driveway led us to a towering Victorian mansion. The place looked pristine, but oddly, there were very few cars in sight. Leah shrugged off my observation, suggesting most people carpooled. As soon as we stepped inside, I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. The house was beautifully decorated, but there was no music playing, and the lighting was dim. Groups of people mingled in the large sitting room, but the conversations were muted, almost hushed. It wasn't what I'd imagined for a reunion. Several people approached Leah, hugging her and chatting as if they hadn't seen her in years. Then, their attention would turn to me. Their questions felt invasive. Where are you from? What do you do? Do you live alone? The way they looked at me, like they were dissecting every word I said, made my skin crawl. I whispered to Leah, asking why everyone seemed so serious. She smiled and brushed it off, saying, "They're just curious. I don't bring people around often." I tried to relax, but the unease kept growing. Something about the guests felt off. Most of them didn't look like they were in their early 30s, as Leah had mentioned. Many appeared much older, their faces lined and weary in ways that seemed unnatural for their age. When I commented on it, Leah laughed softly, saying, "Not everyone ages gracefully." As the evening wore on, I realized I hadn't seen or met the party host. When I asked Leah about him, she hesitated before saying he was probably around somewhere. That answer didn't sit right with me. Feeling suffocated by the stares and the awkward energy, I excused myself to find the bathroom. I wandered through the hallways of the house, noticing how eerily silent it was despite the number of people there. Every time I passed someone, they would stop what they were doing to watch me walk by. It felt like I was being evaluated. Once inside the bathroom, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bathtub, texting my friends about how bizarre the party was. Their responses were a mix of jokes and confusion. I told them I wanted to leave but didn't know how to convince Leah without being rude. Just as I was building up the nerve to fake a reason to leave, someone knocked on the bathroom door. I quickly washed my hands and stepped out, expecting to see Leah. Instead, it was a man I hadn't noticed earlier. He looked younger than most of the guests, maybe closer to my age, but his expression was grim. As I stepped past him, he leaned in and whispered, "You should leave. She's not who she says she is." I froze. "What do you mean?" He smirked, his voice barely audible. "What did she tell you this was? A reunion? Do these people look like they're here for a high school reunion?" He gave me a knowing look, then slipped into the bathroom and shut the door before I could ask more. My pulse was racing as I made my way back toward the sitting room. Leah spotted me and waved, but I avoided eye contact. Something about that guy's warning resonated with the growing dread I'd felt since arriving. I didn't stop to explain or say goodbye. I walked straight out the front door, got in my car, and drove away. Leah texted me as I was driving, "Where are you?" I ignored it. When I got home, I looked up her number online, and my stomach dropped. The name associated with her number wasn't Leah, it was a completely different name. Even more unsettling, the address she'd given me to pick her up didn't match the one linked to her number. I realized I'd never actually seen her leave her supposed home. She'd always been waiting for me outside. I blocked her number and told my friends everything. They joked that it sounded like a horror movie, but their laughter didn't ease the lingering unease. To this day, I don't know what that party was or who Leah really was. But every so often, I think about the man who warned me to leave. Whoever he was, I'm grateful I listened.